remember this house. The Egges live here. Oh. Oh, that's me. Well, it was meant to be me. Didn't quite get the eyes correct. Look a bit luminous there. This portrait was done just before my marriage to Charles. I was 15 years old and ready for a lifetime of happiness with my Charles. How little did I know. It would only last for 3 years. And while here in Richmond, I performed quite regularly in the theater. Oh. Yes, that is the building. That is the new theater in Richmond. It was not ablaze when we performed there. My, the play that night must have set the house on fire. Oh. Dear Mrs. Allen. Oh, I remember this lovely lady, Mrs. Frances Allen, and her husband, John. We won't discuss him. She's a lovely lady. I remember when I was in Richmond, that last summer and fall, I was so ill with the consumption. It was terrible. I had sent William to Baltimore to be with his grandparents, and I kept little Edgar and Rosalie by my side. I couldn't bear to be apart from all of my children. It was torture to be away from William. But I simply couldn't cope without my husband to support me, and I had to take care of my children. My health so rapidly declined, I could no longer perform and support my children. And as I lay dying in a boarding house near the Capitol, this lovely lady, bless you, she and Mrs. Gallego, one of the wealthiest women in Richmond. Oh, and Mrs. Mackenzie. Oh, she was a much younger woman then. Oh, Mrs. Jane Scott Mackenzie. These women came to my bedchamber with toys for the children, with food, delicacies, and with care and with comfort. Dear Mrs. Allen whispered to me she could not have children of her own. She so desperately wanted to give her husband a son. She dotes on my Eddie. I can see the way she loves him. Oh, my sweet boy. He will be well cared for with her. Which is good. I worry for the nightmares that he might have later. Watching his mother coughing up blood, how he stares at me with those huge eyes. Oh. Oh. Well, that young man resembles a young David. That's perhaps how my David looked just before I met him. I do wonder where he is. Oh, and my marriage bond to David. Yes, David Poe Jr., Mrs. Eliza Hawkins, widow of Charles Hawkins. We were married here in Richmond in the spring of 1806. Just a few short months after my Charles died. I would not come back to Richmond until after David had left me. And the end of my life was nigh. Lady. Oh, how she reminds me of David's younger sister, Mariah. Oh, she was a lovely girl. See, David's family was one of rank and distinction in the city of Baltimore, where his father, Major David Poe Sr., was a hero of the Revolution. He had spent a good bit of his own purse to care for the troops around Baltimore, and he and the Marquis de Lafayette had become friends. He was still a man of great honor. The people of Baltimore called him General Poe. When I went and I met him, I remember meeting his lovely wife, his lovely daughter. David had several siblings. David was very pleased to introduce his wife to his family, but I don't know that his family was quite as pleased. You see, his father had wished for his son, his namesake, to be a lawyer. David wished to be an actor, and so he left the law office where he'd been apprenticed, and that's when he joined our traveling band of bards and ended up performing here in Richmond with me and Charles, and marrying me here in Richmond after Charles's death. But Mariah, I remember Mariah was one of the sweetest people in the family. This child looked so like her. She was 15 or so when I met her. She was so charming. And apparently she was quite charmed by me. Oh, what a daunting, ungainly bird of yore. She is one of the muses. Edgar Allan Poe, whose parents, David Poe Jr. and Elizabeth Arnold, well, that's not right. My mother went by Elizabeth Arnold. I was always Eliza. I know they hid me. It does make me think of my mother. My dear, beautiful mother, who introduced me to the stage and taught me all that she knew. Oh, he had all of his limbs when he was born. That's one of the first things I check with each of my children. Oh. These plants remind me of Charleston. Oh, how lovely. Charleston has palms like this all over. It was in Charleston I last performed a full season with my dear mother. You see, my mother was a wonderfully talented actress, formerly of the Covent Garden Theatre in London, you know. And she and I came to this country when I was only 8 years old, and she was so talented, so well received by the audiences, how they enjoyed her. I do wish you could have seen her upon the stage. She was so lovely. She remarried, as my father had died some years before. And within a year's time of us arriving in these states, we'd provided delightful diversions for audiences in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and New York before traveling by boat to the coast of South Carolina. It was a terribly hot summer. It was 1798. I remember we were traveling from Charleston to the Virginia capital of Richmond, traveling through North Carolina. There are so many terrible fevers in the air. Mother caught one of the fevers. The yellow fever. It's terrible, terrible way to die. It was so terrible to watch her succumb, my best friend. I've never quite got over the loss of her. She taught me everything I knew. She was my constant companion and my dearest, dearest friend. And soon my stepfather left me. By then we were in Philadelphia, and I found myself quite in a state of independence at the age of 12. Oh, but this is a lovely garden. You know, I took my children to Charleston. Well, Edgar, at least. He was a wee babe. David had just left us in New York. I did not wish to return to Boston, where I'd had such successes with him and where we'd given birth to our 2 little boys. And so I returned to the South, traveled to Charleston, and then I returned to Richmond. And this is where I would meet dear Mrs. Allen and dear Mrs. Mackenzie. And this is where my boy would grow up. But that building says, "A mysterious death." Oh, no, 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 I don't like the sound of that, no. I wonder if it's about David. Start over. Hello, my name is Eliza Poe. My full name is Elizabeth Arnold Hopkins Poe, but please call me Eliza. My mother was Elizabeth. My mother was so talented, so lovely. We came to the States in 1796 when I was but 8 years old, and we were very popular upon the stage. I made my debut that spring at her benefit, singing a delightful song called "The Market Lass," that's meant to cure all manners of agues and ills and complaints. And I will sing it for you, as I'm sure some of you are suffering from a rheumatism. Though my dad, I must own, is but poor, his cot can each comfort supply. The vine tendril curls around his door, and streamlets meander anigh. The vine tendril curls round his door, and streamlets meander anigh. Health reigns and rewards daily toil, I'd rise at the lark's early song, and meeting my swain at the stile, to market we trip along. To market I trip it along. To market I trip it along. I remember the audience said that I was astounding. And thereafter I performed quite regularly. And being a player upon the stage in that time was quite a challenging career. You see, we had no permanent address. We had to follow the season. So every several weeks or months, we would travel to a new town or new city where we would entertain those occupants before moving on yet again. We performed quite a lot those first few years, traveling all across this young country. My mother died when I was 11 years old. My stepfather and I continued to perform and travel, but then he left me in Philadelphia to pursue his own fortunes, and I found myself quite in a state of independence. I was 12 years old, and I was performing with the Chestnut Street Theater. This was the largest, the most ornate, the most beautiful theater in America. It was under the management of a brilliant actor named Thomas Wignell, who was a favorite of President George Washington. And he had seen great promise in me, which I saw as a direct testimony to my mother's constant care and teaching and what she had given me of her skills. My life became the theater, my family the players. And over the next few years, as my repertoire and figure took shape, I did what any young girl would do. I fell in love. We were married in Alexandria. I was 15, he was 18. His name was Charles Hopkins. He was such a talented, handsome man. Oh, so talented. Oh, how he'd have the audience laughing, almost falling out of their seats. We were married for 3 years, and he managed our band here in Richmond, where the plaudits for our little company filled the reviews. Several actors joined us during that time. I remember one young man, remember when David joined us. David was from Baltimore, and he fancied himself an actor. Charles saw promise in him, but we were to work with him, you see. And then when Charles became ill, he died of the same terrible disease that took my mother, the terrible, terrible yellow fever. Oh, to be able to forget those endless nights and the black vomit. I was widowed at the age of 18. David and I were married the following spring, here in Richmond. And then we traveled to Boston. I'd not been there since my debut 10 years before. I loved Boston so much. That is where I gave birth to my 2 little boys. Little William Henry was born in January of 1807, and then little Edgar, my sweet boy, was born in January the 19th, I recall, of 1809. My boys were so brilliant and so beautiful. After William's birth, however, our family came under some strain. You see, David lacked the apprenticeship and the training upon the stage that I had had, and therefore he stammered and stuttered and forgot his lines. And the Boston audiences were not forgiving. I remember Mr. Buckingham writing, "We came expecting little satisfaction in Mr. Poe," and we were not disappointed. After William's birth, Mr. Buckingham targeted me. You see, I'd just given birth. My managers chose to cast me as Little Pickle, which is a little boy character, but often played by an actress due to the timing and the agility required to properly execute the role. Little Pickle is a boy, not frequently played by an actress who was so recently in the family way. And so Mr. Buckingham took great delight in calling me a very green little pickle, and went on to say that I was hermaphroditical. Hermaphroditical. David could not take the strain much longer, and after Edgar's birth, he left us for several months to beg money of his wealthier relations in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. His kinsmen were not pleased with his life choice, and I don't know if he saw his parents during that time or not in Baltimore, but I know that his family in Pennsylvania mocked him and turned him away. While he was absent, I was performing my first role as Juliet, as Desdemona. I was performing it opposite a great actor and receiving wonderful acclaim while caring for my toddler and my infant without the support of my husband's presence or paycheck. He did not wish to hear of my successes when he returned from his unsuccessful sojourn southward, but he did make the decision that we would move from Boston to New York. And I did not wish to leave Boston, but he thought he would have better success in New York. Alas, the reviewers there were, if possible, less kind than they had been in Boston. The strain became too much. He began drinking more heavily, unable to perform, and then he left us. I don't know what happened to him. Oh, where can fly my soul's true love? Sad I wander this lone grove, sighs and tears for him I shed. Henry's from Laura fled, thy love to me thou didst impart. Thy love soon won my virgin heart. But oh, dearest Henry, thou hast betrayed thy love with thy poor cottage maid. considered returning to Boston, but to return after such a successful season and without the support of my husband, very clearly abandoned by him, and once again in the family way. I couldn't go back to that beautiful city that I loved so much and where I found my best and most sympathetic friends. I returned to the South where I'd always had success, first to Charleston, and then I returned to Richmond. I gave birth to a little girl in Norfolk during my travels, my little Rosalie. Mr. and Mrs. Poe in Baltimore have offered to take little William, but they cannot afford to take more than one child, they say, as much as they dote on Edgar. They don't seem terribly interested in Rosalie. And so Richmond is where my bones will rest for all time. When I died, my children were taken care of. Mrs. Allen took little Edgar. Mrs. Mackenzie, her family has a girls' boarding school here in Richmond, so my Rosalie will get a very good education and be very well cared for, and I know that his grandparents will dote on William. Perhaps even Mariah will help take care of my boy. I was only 24 years old when I passed, and I left behind 3 beautiful, brilliant children, a repertoire of nearly 300 roles, and the unfulfilled promise of a great theatrical career. Last night the dogs did bark, I went to the gate to see, when every lass had her spark, but nobody came to me. And it's, oh dear, what will become of me? Oh dear, what shall I do? Nobody coming to marry me, nobody coming to woo. Nobody coming to woo. They say I'm beauteous and fair, they say I'm scornful and proud, and oh, now I must despair, for I am growing old. And it's, oh dear, what will become of me? Oh dear, what shall I do? Nobody coming to marry me, nobody coming to woo. Ooh, nobody coming to woo. Ooh, nobody coming to woo. And now I will sing one last song for you, one of my favorite pieces. It's a love song. It reminds me of happy times. Drink to me only with thine eyes, and I will pledge with mine. Or leave a kiss within the cup, and I'll not ask for wine. The thirst that from the soul doth rise, doth ask a drink divine. But might I of Jove's nectar sup, I would not change for thine. I sent thee late a rosy wreath, not so much honoring thee, as giving it a hope that there it could not withered be. But thou thereon didst only breathe, then sent'st it back to me. Since when it grows and smells, I swear not of itself, but thee. I do thank you for letting me share my story with you. I hope that sometime you might come here to Richmond and pay your respects at my grave, where I'm buried at the church on the hill. Maybe you will visit some of my son's spots where he visited and grew up here in this town, this kingdom by the sea. Thank you.